I got the letter on a Tuesday. One of those days where nothing feels right from the start. Coffee too bitter, shower too cold, traffic too slow. By the time the courier showed up at my apartment door, I was already in a mood. "Andy Alvarez?" he asked, holding out his electronic pad thing while glancing nervously over his shoulder. "That's me." I scribbled my signature on the screen. He shoved a thick manila envelope at me and backed away like I had something contagious. "All yours. Have a good one." Then he was gone, practically running down the hallway to the elevator. I shut the door and turned the envelope over in my hands. No return address, just my name typed on a label. Inside was a stack of legal documents with a law firm's letterhead. Granger, Wilcox and Associates from Vancouver, British Columbia. "What the hell?" I muttered, scanning the first page. It was about an inheritance. From someone named Marcus Alvarez. I sat down hard on my couch. Alvarez was my last name, sure, but I'd never heard of any Marcus in our family. The letter explained he was my uncle, my father's brother, who had recently passed away, and apparently he'd left me his property. A cabin somewhere in British Columbia. I called the law firm immediately. "Yes, Mr. Alvarez," said the receptionist after I explained who I was. "Mr. Wilcox has been expecting your call. Can you come to our office tomorrow?" The next day, I sat across from a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who slid a folder across his immaculate desk. "Your uncle was an unusual man," Wilcox said, choosing his words carefully. "He lived alone for many years. The cabin is quite remote." "I've never heard of him before. Are you sure there's no mistake?" "No mistake. We tracked you through old family records. You're his only living relative." "What about my dad? Shouldn't he?" "Your father was specifically excluded from the will." Wilcox adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Alvarez was very clear about that. Family drama. I knew nothing about." "Great. So, what exactly am I inheriting?" "A cabin on approximately 10 acres of woodland. No mortgage, property taxes paid up for the next 5 years." He slid another document toward me. "These are the coordinates. There's no proper address." "Coordinates? Like middle-of-nowhere coordinates?" "Precisely." He didn't smile. "There's also this." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting. Below it, "Read when you get there. Mr. Alvarez insisted this be given to you unopened." I turned it over in my hands. "And if I don't want this inheritance?" Wilcox looked surprised. "It's quite valuable property. Remote, yes, but pristine wilderness. You could sell it, of course." I thought about my cramped apartment, my boring accounting job, the emptiness of my life since Lillian died. Maybe a change of scenery wouldn't be the worst thing. "I'll need to see it first," I said. "Of course, here are the keys." He handed me a small ring with 3 old-fashioned keys. One for the front door, one for the back, and one for... Well, I'm not entirely sure. Your uncle didn't specify. 2 days later, I was driving a rental car north from Vancouver, watching the city fade into suburbs, then into forests that grew denser with each passing mile. The GPS lost signal about an hour after I turned onto a logging road, forcing me to navigate by the printed directions and coordinates Wilcox had given me. The rental car, a compact economy model completely wrong for these roads, groaned as I bounced over potholes and ruts. The last 20 miles took nearly 2 hours, the road narrowing until it was barely more than a trail. Just when I was sure I'd taken a wrong turn, the trees opened into a small clearing. And there it was. The cabin looked like something from another century. A solid structure of dark timber with a steep roof, a covered porch wrapping around the front, and a stone chimney climbing up one side. It wasn't the rundown shack I'd expected. This place had been built to last. I parked and got out, stretching my back after the long drive. The silence hit me immediately. No birds calling, no insects buzzing. Nothing but the sound of wind through the massive evergreens that surrounded the clearing. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. The cabin key turned smoothly in the lock, which surprised me. I'd expected rust or resistance, but everything worked perfectly. Inside, it was dim but not dark. Dust motes floated in the beams of afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. The main room was larger than it looked from outside, a combined living and dining area with a stone fireplace, a worn leather couch, and a heavy wooden table with 4 chairs. A kitchen area took up one corner, with an old gas stove and a refrigerator that hummed quietly, telling me the power was working. Off to one side, a short hallway led to what I assumed was a bedroom and bathroom. A steep staircase climbed to what must be an attic or loft. Another door, heavy and solid, was set into the far wall, probably leading to a basement. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and clean. Someone had been maintaining this place. I set my bag down and pulled out the sealed envelope. My name was written in the same shaky handwriting as on the outside of the package I'd received. I tore it open and unfolded several pages of lined paper. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, like someone had been writing in a hurry, or with an unsteady hand. To Andy Alvarez. If you're reading this, I'm dead, and you've inherited my burden. I'm sorry. I tried to find another way, but there isn't one. The cabin chooses its guardian, and now it's chosen you. You must follow these rules if you want to survive. 1. Stay inside after dark. No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, do not go outside once the sun sets. 2. Never enter the attic. The door should remain locked. Ignore any sounds from above. 3. Keep the basement door locked at all times. If it opens by itself, leave the house immediately, unless it's dark. If it's dark, you must choose. 4. If anyone claims to be Marcus Alvarez, don't believe them. I am dead. Whatever wears my face is not me. There's more to explain, but not here, not like this. Look for my journals in the basement, but only enter during daylight, and never if the door opens on its own. I'm sorry it has to be you. I had no choice. Marcus Alvarez. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet cabin. What the hell is this? I said to the empty room. It had to be some kind of joke, or maybe my uncle really had been crazy. Living alone in the woods for years would do that to anyone, I guess. I folded the paper and stuck it on the refrigerator with a magnet I found there, a touristy one from Banff National Park. The rules looked even more ridiculous pinned there between a grocery list written in the same handwriting and an old calendar from 3 years ago. I spent the next hour exploring the cabin. The bedroom had a queen-sized bed with clean but musty-smelling sheets. The bathroom was basic but functional, with a shower that sputtered but produced hot water. The kitchen cabinets held canned goods, pasta, and other non-perishables. The attic door at the top of the stairs was indeed locked, and none of the keys I had fitted. The basement door, however, opened easily with the 3rd key. I flicked on a light switch at the top of the stairs and saw a concrete floor below. I'd check it out later. By the time I finished my inspection, the sun was getting low. I grabbed a beer from the surprisingly well-stocked refrigerator and stepped out onto the porch to watch the sunset. The silence was even more noticeable now. No crickets starting their evening chorus. No birds settling in for the night. Just that strange wind through the trees that almost sounded like whispers. I took a swig of beer and tried to ignore the prickle at the back of my neck. The massive evergreens surrounding the clearing seemed to absorb the fading light, creating deep pools of shadow that grew and shifted as the sun sank lower. Stay inside after dark, I muttered, mocking the first rule. Right. But as the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped, I found myself glancing back at the warm light spilling from the cabin's windows. The beer wasn't tasting so good anymore. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest, a sharp crack that cut through the silence. I stood up quickly, peering into the trees. "Hello?" I called. "Someone there?" Nothing. Just that weird wind whisper in the growing darkness. I told myself it was probably just a deer or some other animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond the tree line. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness fell with surprising speed. One minute I could see the edge of the clearing clearly. The next, the forest was just a wall of black. Another snap, closer this time, then another. I backed toward the door, my heart suddenly pounding. This was stupid. I was letting an old man's crazy rules get to me. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard something else. A sound that didn't belong in these woods, that couldn't possibly be here. Lillian's laugh, soft and musical, just the way I remembered it. I froze, my hand on the door. "Lillian?" I whispered. The laugh came again, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the porch. Then silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, straining to hear it again. Nothing came but that whispering wind. Finally, I went inside, locked the door behind me, and leaned against it, breathing hard. "Get it together, Andy," I said out loud. "You're freaking yourself out over nothing." I looked at the rules on the refrigerator, illuminated by the kitchen light. They seemed less ridiculous now. I checked all the windows, making sure they were locked. Then I checked the back door. Then the basement door, which I made sure was securely locked. By the time I finished, I felt calmer. It was just nerves from the drive, the strange inheritance, and being alone in an unfamiliar place. Nothing more. I heated up a can of soup I found in the cupboard and ate it at the kitchen table, trying to ignore how loud my spoon sounded against the bowl in the quiet cabin. After dinner, I tried reading one of the paperbacks I found on a shelf, but I couldn't focus. The silence was too complete, too unnatural. Even in my apartment in the city, there was always some background noise. Traffic, neighbors, the hum of appliances. Here, there was nothing. No, not nothing. As I sat there trying to read, I became aware of sounds I hadn't noticed before. The house settling, the refrigerator cycling on and off, the wind finding gaps in the window frames. And something else. Something I couldn't quite identify. I put the book down and listened. There it was. A faint scratching sound like fingernails on wood. It seemed to be coming from outside, from the direction of the porch. I got up and moved to the window, staying to the side so I wouldn't be silhouetted against the light. I peered out into the darkness but could see nothing beyond the small pool of light from the porch lamp. The scratching continued, moving from one side of the porch to the other. Then it stopped. I waited, barely breathing. A thump against the front door made me jump back. Then another, not loud but deliberate, like someone tapping to get my attention. "Who's there?" I called, hating how my voice shook. No answer, just another tap, slightly harder this time. I backed away from the door, my heart racing again. This was crazy. I was in the middle of nowhere. There shouldn't be anyone out there. The tapping stopped. I stood in the middle of the room, listening so hard my ears hurt. Then I heard it. A voice muffled by the door but unmistakable. "Andy, are you in there? It's me." Lillian's voice. My dead ex-wife's voice coming from the other side of the door. I stumbled backward until I hit the couch and sat down hard. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. "Andy, please, I'm cold out here. Let me in." Her voice was perfect. That slight catch when she said my name, the way she always sounded a little breathless when she was upset. But Lillian was dead. 3 years dead. Car accident. Closed casket. "You're not real," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Andy, don't be silly. Of course I'm real. Please let me in. It's dark out here and I'm scared." I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear her, pleading, begging, her voice rising with desperation. "Andy, please. Something's out here with me. Please let me in." I grabbed a cushion from the couch and pressed it over my head, trying to block out the sound of her voice. It didn't help. If anything, her cries became more desperate, more terrified. And then they changed. "Andy, let me in! Let me in now!" It wasn't Lillian's voice anymore. It was something using her voice, but the tone was all wrong. Too deep, too guttural, with an edge that made my skin crawl. I sat there with the cushion over my head, shaking as the thing outside continued to pound on the door and scream with Lillian's voice. The pounding grew louder, the wood creaking under the assault. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the screaming. I sat frozen, waiting for it to start again. Instead, I heard something else, a creak from overhead, then another, footsteps moving slowly across what must be the attic floor. Deliberate steps from one end to the other and back again. I looked up at the ceiling, following the sound with my eyes. The footsteps paused directly above me, as if whatever was up there knew exactly where I was sitting. Another rule from the letter flashed in my mind. Never enter the attic. Ignore any sounds from above. The footsteps resumed their pacing, and I lowered my gaze to the refrigerator where the rules were posted. In the harsh kitchen light, they no longer looked like the paranoid ramblings of a crazy old man. They looked like a survival guide. I tried the car again, turning the key harder like that would somehow make a difference. Nothing. Not even a click. I smacked the steering wheel and got out, popping the hood to stare at the engine like I knew what I was looking at. "Come on," I muttered, jiggling a few wires that seemed important. "You worked fine yesterday." The battery terminals looked clean. No obvious problems. I slammed the hood shut and leaned against it, looking back at the cabin. It sat there, all innocent in the morning light. Birds were singing now, the sun was shining, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Except for my dead car and the fact that I hadn't slept all night because of footsteps in a locked attic and a basement door that opened by itself. I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal. Not even a single bar. "This is crazy," I said out loud, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet clearing. There's got to be a logical explanation. But I couldn't think of one that covered everything. Lillian's voice in the darkness, the footsteps overhead, the basement door swinging open despite being locked, and now my car wouldn't start. I walked back to the cabin, dragging my feet. The rules on the fridge seemed to mock me as I passed through the kitchen. I grabbed them and read them again, looking for anything I might have missed. Stay inside after dark. Don't enter the attic. Keep the basement door locked. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Marcus. Simple enough. But what was I supposed to do when the basement door opened by itself? The rules said to leave immediately, unless it was dark. If it was dark, I had to choose. Choose what? The note didn't say. I put the paper back on the fridge and ran my hands through my hair. I needed to think clearly. I had options. I could try to fix the car, I could walk out. 30 miles was a long hike, but not impossible. Or I could stay and try to figure out what the hell was going on. First things first. I needed tools if I was going to check the car properly. I headed for the basement door, then stopped with my hand on the knob. Last night, this door had swung open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness even when I'd shined my flashlight down the stairs. Now it was firmly closed. The chair I'd wedged under the handle lying on its side nearby. It's daytime, I reminded myself. The rules only said not to enter if it opens by itself. I turned the knob and pulled. The door opened normally, revealing a set of wooden stairs leading down into dimness. I flicked the light switch, and a bare bulb illuminated the space below. It looked like a normal basement. Concrete floor, stone walls, some shelves with tools and supplies. Nothing scary or supernatural. I laughed at myself for being so freaked out the night before. I went down the stairs, my footsteps echoing slightly. The basement was bigger than I'd expected, extending under most of the cabin. Along one wall were shelves stocked with canned goods, bottled water, and other supplies. Another wall held tools hanging from pegs, hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches. Perfect. I grabbed what I thought I'd need for the car and was about to head back upstairs when something caught my eye. In the far corner, partially hidden behind some boxes, was a desk, and on the desk were stacks of notebooks. I moved closer, curious. The notebooks were leather-bound journals, dozens of them, arranged in neat chronological order with dates written on the spines. The earliest was from 1983, the most recent from just a few months ago. I picked up the newest one and opened it to a random page. The handwriting matched the letter I'd received, cramped and shaky, but legible. April 17th. They're getting more aggressive. Last night, something wearing Sarah's face pressed against the bedroom window for hours. I couldn't sleep with her watching me. Her eyes weren't right, too wide, too dark. When dawn came, there were handprints on the glass, but they weren't human. Too many fingers, too long. I flipped to another page. May 2nd. The basement opened again tonight. I heard them coming up the stairs, whispering, laughing. I had to choose. I always choose the attic. Better the devil you know. I closed the journal, my hands shaking slightly. This was crazy. My uncle had clearly been mentally ill, living out here alone for too long. That explained the weird rules and warnings. He'd created an elaborate delusion, and I was letting it get to me. I grabbed the tools and headed back upstairs, shutting the basement door firmly behind me. I tried the car again, checking the battery connections, looking for loose wires, anything that might explain why it wouldn't start. Nothing worked. By mid-afternoon, I was sweaty, frustrated, and no closer to getting the car running. I went back inside for water and to think about my options. Walking out was looking more necessary, but I'd need to prepare. 30 miles through wilderness wasn't a casual stroll. I'd need water, food, a map if I could find one, and I'd need to start early in the morning to make sure I reached civilization before dark. I spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and trying to ignore the growing knot of dread in my stomach as the sun sank lower. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Nothing had actually hurt me. I just had a weird night in a strange place after reading a disturbing letter. My imagination had done the rest. As the light outside faded to dusk, I found myself checking the locks again. Front door, back door, windows. I left the basement door for last, staring at it for a long moment before turning the key and testing the handle. Locked tight. This time I dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it. Let's see it open by itself now. I made a simple dinner from the canned goods in the kitchen, then settled on the couch with one of my uncle's journals. If I was going to be stuck here another night, I might as well try to understand what had happened to him. The earliest journal entries were normal enough. Observations about wildlife, notes on repairs to the cabin, comments about the weather. But as the years progressed, the entries became increasingly paranoid and strange. He wrote about voices in the woods, faces at the windows, footsteps in the attic. The same things I'd experienced. I closed the journal and set it aside, rubbing my eyes. It was getting late, and I needed to sleep if I was going to hike out tomorrow. I checked all the locks one more time, then went to the bedroom. The bed was comfortable enough, but I couldn't relax. Every creak of the cabin made me tense. I stared at the ceiling, waiting, though I wasn't sure for what. I didn't have to wait long. It started as a soft, scraping sound, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. Then came the first footstep, a distinct creak directly above my head, then another and another. Someone, or something, was walking in the attic. I sat up, my heart pounding. The steps moved slowly from one end of the attic to the other, then back again. A steady, deliberate pace. Back and forth, back and forth. It's just the house settling, I whispered to myself. Old wood expanding and contracting. But I knew that wasn't true. The rhythm was too regular, too purposeful. And now it was speeding up, the footsteps coming faster, more urgent. I got out of bed and went to the hallway, staring up at the attic door at the top of the stairs. It remained closed, the lock intact, but the footsteps continued, now sounding like someone running back and forth, the ceiling creaking under their weight. Then they stopped. The silence was sudden and complete. I stood frozen, waiting. Nothing. Just as I was about to go back to bed, convinced I'd imagined it all, I heard something else, a low groan from the direction of the living room. The basement door. I ran to the living room just in time to see the bookcase I'd placed in front of the basement door sliding slowly across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. The door behind it was opening, the locked knob turning on its own. "No," I said, backing away. "No, no, no." The bookcase toppled over with a crash, and the basement door swung fully open. Beyond it was nothing but darkness, a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the living room. The rules flashed in my mind. If the basement door opens by itself, leave the house immediately, unless it's dark. If it's dark, you must choose. Choose what? Between going outside where Lillian's voice had called to me, or staying inside with whatever was coming up from the basement. I backed toward the front door, my hand finding the knob behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. Outside was darkness, and in that darkness was something wearing my dead wife's face. A sound came from the basement, a soft, shuffling step on the stairs, then another. Something was coming up. I made my decision. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and then hurried to the bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I pushed the dresser in front of it, then backed away to the far corner of the room, the knife clutched in my shaking hand. I could hear it moving through the living room now, a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It paused outside my bedroom door. The handle turned, but the lock held. Then came a gentle knock. 3 soft taps. "Andy?" Lillian's voice just as I remembered it. "Andy, are you in there? I miss you so much." I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear her. "Please, Andy. I'm so cold out here. Let me in." "You're not real," I said, my voice breaking. "Lillian is dead." A pause. Then, "I know I died, Andy, but I found my way back to you. Don't you want to see me again?" God help me, I did. Even knowing it couldn't be her, some part of me wanted to open that door. "Just let me in," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Let me see your face one more time." I stayed silent, pressing myself harder against the wall. The voice changed, growing angry. "Let me in, Andy. Let me in now." The door shuddered as something slammed against it. The dresser slid an inch across the floor. Another slam, and it moved further. I gripped the knife tighter, knowing it would be useless against whatever was out there. The dresser slid another few inches with each impact. The doorframe was starting to splinter. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the assault stopped. Silence fell again, broken only by my ragged breathing. Minutes passed. I didn't move from my corner. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear and I must have dozed off, still clutching the knife. I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. The bedroom door was intact, the dresser still pushed against it. Had I dreamed it all? I moved the dresser and cautiously opened the door. The living room was a mess, the bookcase still toppled over, books scattered across the floor. But the basement door was closed. I approached it warily and tried the handle. Locked, as if it had never opened. I went to the kitchen and made coffee with shaking hands, then sat at the table trying to think clearly. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was happening, it was getting worse. I had to leave today, car or no car. I packed a backpack with water bottles, energy bars, a flashlight, and a map I'd found in a drawer. I'd hike out, find help, maybe never come back. Let the lawyers sell this place to someone else. I was just about to leave when I noticed something on the table that hadn't been there before. A single sheet of paper with handwriting I recognized from the journals. But this note was fresh, the ink still slightly wet. The car won't start. The phone won't work. The path will lead you in circles. The cabin has chosen you, just as it chose me. You can't leave until you accept your role as guardian. Read the journals, learn the rules, survive. I crumpled the note and threw it across the room. "No," I said out loud. "I'm leaving. Now." I shouldered my backpack and walked out the front door, not bothering to lock it behind me. The morning was bright and clear, the forest peaceful. I found the path that led away from the cabin and started walking, determined to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. I walked for hours, following what should have been the way back to the main road. But something was wrong. The path kept turning, doubling back on itself. Landmarks I passed began to look familiar, as if I was going in circles. By late afternoon, exhausted and disoriented, I emerged from the trees into a clearing. And there was the cabin, exactly as I'd left it. I stood there staring at it in disbelief. It wasn't possible. I'd walked in a straight line away from this place. I couldn't have circled back. But here I was. The sun was getting low. Soon it would be dark again, and I'd be facing another night of horrors. Unless I found answers instead of running from them. I went back inside, dropped my backpack, and headed straight for the basement. This time I wasn't looking for tools. I was looking for the journals. If I couldn't leave, I needed to understand. What was this place? What had happened to my uncle? And what did it mean that I was now the guardian? The answers had to be in those journals, and I had only a few hours until sunset to find them. I'd been in the cabin for 3 days when I finally got a good look at what was pretending to be my dead ex-wife. The sun was setting, painting the cabin walls orange as I frantically checked the locks again. Front door, back door, windows. I'd given up trying to leave after my third attempt led me right back to the clearing. The car still wouldn't start. My phone still showed no signal. And the journals I'd found in the basement painted a picture so insane I couldn't fully process it. I was trapped here with whatever these things were. The knock came just as the last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the trees. 3 soft taps, almost hesitant. Andy? Her voice. Lillian's voice. Exactly as I remembered it. "Andy, are you in there?" I froze in the middle of the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the 3rd night she'd come. Each time I'd hidden in the bedroom until dawn, hands pressed over my ears to block out her pleas. But tonight something made me walk to the door. Maybe it was exhaustion from barely sleeping. Maybe it was the desperate need to understand what was happening to me. I approached slowly, careful to keep my footsteps silent. The peephole was small and cloudy with age, but I leaned in and looked through. And there she was. Lillian stood on the porch, illuminated by the yellow porch light. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her face, just like I remembered. She wore the blue sundress she'd had on the day of the accident. Her green eyes were red-rimmed from crying, tears tracking down her freckled cheeks. She looked so real, so perfectly, heartbreakingly real. "Andy, please," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm lost. I don't know how I got here. I'm so cold." My hand moved toward the doorknob without me telling it to. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd heard her voice, seen her face. 3 years of guilt and grief and emptiness. "I know you're in there," she called, her voice breaking. "I can see the light. Please, Andy. I'm scared out here." I pressed my forehead against the door, my fingers still inches from the knob. This wasn't Lillian. It couldn't be. Lillian was dead. I'd identified her body. I'd watched them lower her casket into the ground. "Whatever you are," I whispered, "you're not her." There was a pause. Then, What are you talking about? Of course it's me. Who else would I be? I looked through the peephole again. She was closer now, her face nearly pressed against the door from the other side. Something was off. Her smile was too wide. Her eyes reflected the porch light like an animal's. "You're not Lillian," I said louder this time. "Lillian died 3 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. Then her expression changed, hardened. "Let me in, Andy." Her voice dropped an octave. "Let me in right now." "No." Her face contorted, twisting into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, teeth suddenly too numerous, too sharp. Her eyes darkened until they were just black pits in her face. "Let me in." The scream that came from her throat wasn't Lillian's voice anymore. It wasn't even human. It was like multiple voices layered on top of each other, screeching in harmony. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling hard on my ass. The thing outside kept screaming, the sound rising and falling like some horrible siren. The door shuddered as something slammed against it repeatedly. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the bedroom, slamming the door and wedging a chair under the handle like I had the previous nights. The screaming continued, echoing through the cabin. It didn't stop, not after minutes, not after hours. Somewhere around midnight, the attic footsteps started again, heavier than before. Multiple sets of feet running back and forth overhead. The ceiling creaked under their weight. I huddled in the corner of the bedroom, hands pressed over my ears, rocking back and forth. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "This can't be real." But it was. The screaming, the footsteps, and now a new sound. The basement door opening again, despite the bookcase and chair I'd stacked against it. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. By the 4th day, I'd stopped trying to keep track of time. The sun rose and set. The things came after dark. That was all that mattered. I'd read more of the journals, trying to make sense of what was happening. Marcus had documented decades of similar experiences. Things wearing familiar faces appearing at the cabin, begging to be let in. The attic presence growing stronger. The basement door opening by itself. But he'd survived. For years, he'd survived by following the rules. I could do the same. I was in the kitchen, forcing myself to eat a can of cold beans when the sun began to set again. I'd gotten into a routine. Check the locks, secure the basement door as best I could, then hide in the bedroom until dawn. The knock came earlier than usual. 4 sharp raps. But it wasn't Lillian's voice that called my name. "Andy. Andy, it's Dolly. Are you in there?" I nearly dropped the can. Dolly Park had been my friend in college. We'd lost touch after graduation, but I'd always meant to reconnect. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. Dolly stood on the porch, looking exactly as I remembered her. Petite frame, straight black bob, trendy glasses. She was wearing the vintage band t-shirt she'd always loved. "Andy, thank God," she said, relief flooding her face. "My car broke down up the road. I saw the lights and thought maybe someone could help. I had no idea it would be you. What are the odds, right?" Her laugh was perfect, that infectious giggle that had always made me smile. "This isn't real," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "You're not Dolly." Her expression faltered. "What?" "Andy, it's me. We met in Professor Wilson's accounting class, remember? You helped me pass the midterm." She knew details, specific details about our past. How was that possible? "You're not real," I repeated, backing away from the door. "You're like the thing pretending to be Lillian." Her face changed then, just like Lillian's had. The smile stretching too wide, the eyes darkening. "Let me in, Andy," she growled, her voice deepening. "I'm so hungry." I retreated to the bedroom as the screaming started again. This time it was Dolly's voice that became the inhuman shriek that lasted until dawn. The fifth day, I didn't bother getting out of bed until noon. What was the point? I couldn't leave. I couldn't stop what was happening. All I could do was survive until what? Until I went crazy like Marcus? Until I died? I forced myself to eat something, to drink water. Basic survival. The journals had mentioned that the things fed on fear, on desperation. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But as the sun began to set, I felt the familiar dread building in my stomach. Who would it be tonight? Whose face would they steal? The knock came right at dusk, 3 gentle taps. "Andy? Sweetheart, are you in there?" My grandmother's voice. Ella Vasquez had practically raised me after my parents divorced. She died when I was 12. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see her face twisted into something monstrous. But I found myself at the door anyway, peering through the peephole. There she was, white curls, warm brown eyes behind reading glasses, floral house dress. She looked exactly as I remembered her. "Andy, dear heart," she said softly, "I've been so worried about you. Please open the door." I pressed my hands against the door. "You're not my grandmother. She's been dead for 20 years. "I know I died, Sugar," she said, her voice gentle, "but I've come back to help you. You're in danger here." "You're the danger," I whispered. Her expression remained kind, but something shifted in her eyes. "Let me in, Andy. Let me take care of you like I used to." I backed away as her face began to change, the kindly features melting into something ancient and hungry. The screaming started again, and I retreated to my corner in the bedroom. The attic footsteps were worse that night, so heavy the ceiling light swayed. The basement door not only opened but slammed repeatedly against the wall. I didn't sleep. I couldn't even close my eyes. By the 5th night, I was barely functioning. I hadn't slept more than an hour or 2 at a time since arriving at the cabin. I'd been living on canned food and tap water. My hands shook constantly, and I'd started seeing shadows move in my peripheral vision even during daylight. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the rules pinned to the refrigerator. They seemed so simple, so inadequate for the horror I was experiencing. Stay inside after dark. Don't enter the attic. Keep the basement door locked. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Marcus. The sun set, and I waited for the knock. It came, but it sounded different, more measured, more deliberate. I approached the door warily and looked through the peephole. An elderly man stood on the porch. He wore a brown cardigan over a white button-down shirt and pressed khakis. His silver hair was neatly combed, and kind blue eyes peered through wire-rimmed bifocals. He looked like someone's harmless grandfather. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. "Who are you?" The old man smiled gently. "Andy, my boy. I'm so glad you're still alive." "Who are you?" I repeated. "My name is Parker Collins," he said. Then he leaned closer to the peephole and lowered his voice. "But you know me as Marcus Alvarez." My blood ran cold. The 4th rule flashed in my mind. If anyone claims to be Marcus Alvarez, don't believe them. "That's impossible," I said. "Marcus Alvarez is dead." The old man shook his head. "No, Andy, I'm not dead. I've been hiding, waiting. The things that hunt here, they think I'm gone, but I've been watching. I wrote those rules to protect you until I could return." He sounded so reasonable, so sincere. But the rules... If you're Marcus, why does the letter say not to trust anyone claiming to be you? He sighed heavily. Because I knew they might try to imitate me. But look at me, Andy. Really look. I'm not like the others, am I? I'm not screaming or changing. I'm just an old man who needs your help. I looked more carefully. He did seem different from the others, more solid, more real. "I need to come inside," he continued. "There are things I couldn't explain in the letter or the journals, Things you need to know to survive this place. His hand reached for the doorknob, testing it. The lock held, but I could see the knob turning slightly. "The cabin is a trap, Andy," he said, his voice urgent now. "A trap designed for something ancient and hungry, something that's been here long before humans walked these forests." I was about to respond when I noticed something behind him, barely visible in the porch light. Another figure stood there, partially hidden in the shadows. As I watched, it stepped forward. It was Marcus Alvarez again. But wrong. Horribly wrong. This version was rotting, flesh hanging from exposed bone, empty eye sockets staring at me. It wore the same clothes as the living version, but they hung from a skeletal frame. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is that?" I gasped. The living Marcus glanced over his shoulder, then turned back to me. "Don't be afraid. That's just a manifestation, a warning." "A warning of what?" "Of what happens if you don't let me in." His voice hardened slightly. "The choice is yours, Andy. Let me in so I can perform the ritual that will end this, or become like him, trapped between worlds, neither living nor dead." The doorknob turned again, straining against the lock. Wood splintered near the hinges as something far stronger than an old man should be pushed against the door. I backed away, my mind racing. The rules said not to trust anyone claiming to be Marcus. But the rules came from Marcus. So if this really was Marcus, then the rules might be wrong. But if it wasn't Marcus... The door shuddered as something slammed against it. I turned and ran to the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife I could find. Not that I thought it would do much good against whatever was outside. Another slam, and I heard wood splintering. The lock wouldn't hold much longer. And behind me, the basement door creaked open again, despite the chair and padlocks I'd secured it with. I was trapped between two impossible choices: face whatever was breaking through the front door, or descend into the darkness of the basement that had opened by itself. The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters, and both versions of Marcus Alvarez entered. The living one walking normally, the dead one floating inches off the floor. They moved in perfect synchronization like a dancer and his shadow. "Don't be afraid, Andy," they said in unison, their voices overlapping in a horrible harmony. "We've come to offer salvation, freedom. All it requires is a necessary sacrifice." They reached out with 4 arms between them, fingers stretching impossibly long across the room like living shadows. I looked at the basement door standing open behind me, then back at the creatures advancing across the living room. In that moment, I made my choice. I turned and ran for the basement, knife still clutched in my hand. The things screamed behind me, a sound of rage and frustration that made my ears ring. I tumbled down the wooden stairs into complete darkness, expecting to feel those impossible fingers grabbing at me any second. But the screaming stayed above. They couldn't follow. Somehow, I knew the basement was beyond their reach when someone entered by choice instead of being forced. It was a sanctuary of sorts, the one place in the cabin where I might be safe. At least until morning. I tumbled down the wooden stairs, my hands grabbing wildly at nothing as I fell. The knife clattered away somewhere in the darkness. My shoulder slammed into something hard at the bottom, knocking the wind out of me. For a few seconds, I just lay there gasping like a fish. The screaming upstairs hadn't stopped. It was like 2 voices layered on top of each other. One old and human, one definitely not. "Andy, you've made a terrible mistake," the voices called down. "Come back up. We can still help you." I pushed myself up, wincing at the pain in my shoulder. The basement was pitch black around me. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. "Where's the damn light?" I muttered, feeling along the wall where I remembered the switch being. My fingers found it and I flipped it up. Nothing happened. "Of course," I said, laughing a little hysterically. "Of course the power's out now." The screaming upstairs had changed to a weird scratching sound like nails on the floor. They were moving around up there, looking for another way in. I remembered my phone and pulled it from my pocket. The screen lit up, still no signal, but at least I had a flashlight. I switched it on and swept the beam around the basement. It looked different somehow. The shelves of supplies were still there, and the desk with the journals, but the far wall. I didn't remember it having a door. I moved closer, keeping my light trained on it. It was a heavy wooden door with metal bands across it, set right into the stone wall. It looked ancient compared to the rest of the basement. "What the hell?" I whispered. The screaming upstairs had stopped. The silence felt almost worse. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The beam of my flashlight showed empty wooden steps leading up to the open basement door. Nothing was coming down. Not yet. But I could hear them moving around up there, getting closer to the top of the stairs. I backed away, bumping into the desk with the journals. One fell to the floor, pages fluttering open. My light caught a sentence written in that familiar, shaky handwriting. "The basement is sanctuary when entered by choice." I remembered thinking that, as I ran down here, that somehow I knew they couldn't follow if I chose to enter. But how had I known that? The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. My light beam showed 2 pairs of feet, one in normal shoes, one bare with rotting flesh hanging from bone. They took 1 step down, then another. "They can't come down here," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "The basement is sanctuary when entered by choice." They took another step, and another. Shit. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they could follow. I backed up further, my hand finding the handle of that strange door. It was ice cold to the touch. The 2 versions of Marcus were halfway down the stairs now, moving in that creepy, synchronized way. The living one's face looked almost sad, while the dead one's skull seemed to be grinning. "Andy," they said together, "we only want to help you understand your purpose." "Stay back," I yelled, pressing against the door. They kept coming. I turned the handle and pushed. The door swung open silently, revealing a small room beyond. Without thinking, I stepped through and slammed it shut behind me. The room was tiny, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with stone walls and no windows. The only light came from my phone, and it was filled with books, shelves and stacks of them everywhere. I leaned against the door, listening. I couldn't hear anything from the other side. Had the Marcus things followed me? Were they right outside? I tried the handle. Locked. Great. I'd trapped myself in a stone room with no way out. "Smart move, Andy," I muttered. "Real genius plan." I swept my light around again, looking for another exit. There wasn't one. Just books and journals everywhere. Some looked ancient with cracked leather bindings. Others were newer, like the ones I'd found on the desk. I picked one up at random and opened it. The handwriting wasn't Marcus's. It was older, more formal. June 17th, 1932. The presence in the attic grows stronger. I hear it pacing at all hours now, not just after dark. The rules must be maintained. The barrier must hold. I grabbed another book. April 3rd, 1897. My brother came to the door tonight. He's been dead for 12 years. The thing wearing his face was not convincing. It got the color of his eyes wrong. Still, I nearly opened the door. The loneliness here is a weapon they use against us. I sat down on the floor, my back against the door. These weren't just Marcus's journals. They were records kept by everyone who had lived in the cabin before him. Guardians, like he'd called himself in his letter. A sound made me jump, a soft scratching at the door behind my head. They were out there. "Andy," the voices called, muffled by the thick wood. "You can't hide in there forever." I moved away from the door, crawling deeper into the stacks of books. My light caught something on the floor. A camping lantern. I grabbed it and turned the switch. Amazingly, it lit up, casting a warm glow around the room. With better light, I could see more details. The walls weren't just stone. They had symbols carved into them. Strange, angular shapes that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. And in the center of the room was a small wooden table with a single book open on it. I approached cautiously. This book was different from the others, bound in dark leather that didn't look like it came from any animal I recognized. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was clear and precise. The first page had only a title, The Nature and Purpose of the Cabin. I sat down and began to read. The scratching at the door continued, but it seemed distant now, unimportant compared to what I was learning. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a prison, a containment vessel for something ancient and malevolent that had been here long before humans. The first settlers in this area had discovered it, a place where reality was thin, where things could slip through from somewhere else. They'd built the cabin as a barrier, a way to contain whatever was trying to get through. And they'd established the rules, passed down through generations of guardians. I flipped through pages, reading sections at random. The things that come at night wearing familiar faces are not the true danger. They are merely symptoms, manifestations of what lies beneath. Think of them as antibodies trying to expel a foreign presence. You. The basement serves two purposes. When it opens of its own accord, it becomes a doorway for them to enter. But when you choose to descend, it becomes sanctuary. They cannot follow where you go willingly. The attic contains the weakest point in the barrier. What paces there is a fragment of the whole, testing its prison. Never acknowledge it. Never enter. To do so would be to invite the beginning of the end. I kept reading, my heart pounding harder with each revelation. The most recent entry was dated just days before Marcus must have died. I can feel my time ending. The cancer has spread too far, and the treatments no longer work. I've arranged everything as best I could. The cabin will pass to my nephew, Andrew Alvarez. I've never met him. My brother made sure of that when he left. But the bloodline is what matters. The cabin must always pass to family. It recognizes the connection. I'm sorry, Andrew. I would spare you this burden if I could. But the cabin chooses its guardian, and it has chosen you. The car will never start. The phone will never work. The paths will always lead back here. You cannot leave until your time is done or another takes your place. Learn the rules. Maintain the barrier. And forgive me for what I've done to you. I closed the book, my hands shaking. This was insane, all of it. A cabin that was actually a prison for some ancient evil, rules that had to be followed to keep the barrier intact, guardians chosen by blood. But I couldn't deny what I'd experienced, the things wearing familiar faces, the attic footsteps, the basement door opening by itself, the way I couldn't leave no matter how hard I tried. The scratching at the door had stopped. I listened but heard nothing from the other side. Carefully, I gathered up the most important-looking journals and the book from the table. If I was stuck here, if I really was the new guardian of this place, I needed to understand everything about it. I approached the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I tried the handle again. This time it turned. I pushed the door open a crack and peered out. The basement was empty, no sign of either version of Marcus. My flashlight still lay where I'd dropped it, the beam pointing at nothing. I stepped out, clutching the books to my chest. The camping lantern cast long shadows across the concrete floor. "Hello?" I called softly, not really wanting an answer. Nothing. I made my way to the stairs, looking up toward the open door at the top. Daylight was streaming through. Had I been down here all night? I climbed the stairs slowly, ready to run back down at the first sign of those things. But when I reached the top and peered into the living room, it was empty. Sunlight poured through the windows. Birds were singing outside. The front door hung from one hinge, splintered where they'd broken through. But there was no sign of either version of Marcus. I set the books and lantern down on the kitchen table and checked the time on my phone. 7:23 a.m. I'd spent the entire night in that hidden room. I went to the broken front door and looked outside. The porch was empty. The clearing was peaceful in the morning light. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there. I slumped against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted. I hadn't really slept in days, just caught a few minutes here and there between horrors. But I couldn't rest yet. I had to secure the cabin before nightfall. Fix the door somehow. Prepare for whatever would come next. I went back to the kitchen table and opened the book I'd found, The Nature and Purpose of the Cabin. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The rules on the fridge seemed so inadequate now. Stay inside after dark. Don't enter the attic. Keep the basement door locked. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Marcus. They weren't suggestions. They weren't even just rules. They were the bars of a cage where I was both prisoner and guard. I looked around the cabin that was now my prison, my inheritance, my responsibility. "Okay, Marcus," I said to the empty room. "I get it now. I'm the guardian." Something shifted in the air when I said those words. A subtle change in pressure, like the house itself had been holding its breath and finally relaxed. I opened the book again and began to read more carefully. I had until sunset to learn everything I could, because when darkness fell, they would come again. And next time I needed to be ready. I spent the whole night in that hidden room, hunched over Marcus's journals. My back ached and my eyes burned, but I couldn't stop reading. The camping lantern cast weird shadows across the pages as I flipped through decades of impossible things. The oldest journal dated back to 1897. The handwriting was different, more formal with those fancy loops people used to do, but the content was the same. Things knocking at night, faces of dead loved ones at windows, footsteps in the attic that never stopped. I grabbed another journal, this one from 1932. The presence grows stronger each year. I hear it pacing at all hours now. My wife came to the door again last night, though she's been dead for 6 years. I almost opened it. God help me, I almost did. I kept reading, jumping between different decades, different guardians. All of them trapped here just like me. All of them slowly losing their minds. Around 3 a.m., I found what I was looking for. Marcus's final journal. The handwriting was shakier than in his letter, barely legible in some places. He'd been dying when he wrote it. April 12th, 2023. The cancers spread to my bones. The pain is constant now. The pills barely touch it. But I can't leave. Not until everything's arranged. The cabin must have a guardian. Always. I flipped forward a few pages. April 17th, 2023. I've found her. Melissa Bell in Toronto. My brother's granddaughter. She doesn't know about any of this. About me, about our family, about what waits for her. I've arranged everything with Wilcox. When I'm gone, the cabin passes to Andrew first. If he fails, it goes to her. God forgive me for what I'm doing to them. I sat back against the stone wall, letting that sink in. There was someone else. A backup guardian if I couldn't handle it. A woman named Melissa Bell, who had no idea what was coming for her. I turned the page. April 20th, 2023. The barrier weakens. I feel it in my dreams. The thing in the attic knows I'm dying. It's getting ready, testing the boundaries more aggressively. Last night, it broke through the ceiling in the hallway. I nailed boards over the hole and reinforced the rules. The breach sealed itself by morning. Andrew must understand what he's facing. I've left the book where he'll find it when he's ready. The book. I looked at the ancient leather-bound volume I'd found on the table. The Nature and Purpose of the Cabin. I picked it up again and opened to the first page. This record begins in 1843 when settlers first discovered this place. They found a clearing where nothing grew and animals wouldn't enter. The air felt wrong here. Sounds didn't carry properly. People who stayed overnight reported terrible dreams and visions. They should have left it alone. Instead, they built this cabin as an experiment to see if human habitation could cleanse whatever was wrong with this place. It didn't work. The first family disappeared within a month. The second lasted only 2 weeks. The third family's oldest son survived by following rules he said came to him in dreams. He became the first guardian. I kept reading, my heart pounding harder with each page. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a containment vessel, a prison for something that had been here long before humans arrived. The rules weren't meant to protect whoever lived here. They were meant to keep what was already here contained. The basement serves 2 purposes. When it opens of its own accord, it becomes a doorway for them to enter. But when you choose to descend, it becomes sanctuary. They cannot follow where you go willingly. The attic contains the weakest point in the barrier. What paces there is a fragment of the whole, testing its prison. Never acknowledge it. Never enter. To do so would be to invite the beginning of the end. The things that come at night wearing familiar faces are not the true danger. They are merely symptoms, manifestations of what lies beneath. Think of them as antibodies trying to expel a foreign presence. You. I closed the book, my hands shaking. This was insane. A cabin that was actually a prison for some ancient evil. Rules that had to be followed to keep the barrier intact. Guardians chosen by blood. But I couldn't deny what I'd experienced. The things wearing familiar faces, the attic footsteps, the basement door opening by itself, the way I couldn't leave no matter how hard I tried. I opened the book again, flipping to the final pages. Marcus had added his own entries. The cabin chooses its guardian through bloodline. It must be family. It recognizes the connection. This is why I never had children. I couldn't bear to pass this burden down. But my brother had a son, and his son had a daughter. The line continues. I'm sorry, Andrew. I would spare you this burden if I could. The car will never start. The phone will never work. The paths will always lead back here. You cannot leave until your time is done, or another takes your place. Learn the rules, maintain the barrier, and forgive me for what I've done to you. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. Outside the door, the basement was quiet. No sign of either version of Marcus, no scratching, no voices. I checked my phone. 5:47 a.m., almost dawn. I gathered up the most important journals and the leather book. If I was stuck here, if I really was the new guardian of this place, I needed to understand everything about it. I tried the door handle. It turned easily now. I pushed the door open and peered out. The basement was empty, lit only by my forgotten flashlight on the floor. I stepped out, clutching the books to my chest. Hello? I called softly, not really wanting an answer. Nothing. I made my way to the stairs, looking up toward the open door at the top. Faint gray light filtered down. Dawn was coming. I climbed the stairs slowly, ready to bolt back down at the first sign of those things. But when I reached the top and looked into the living room, it was empty. The front door still hung from one hinge, splintered where they'd broken through. I set the books down on the kitchen table and checked the time again. 6:03 a.m. I'd spent the entire night in that hidden room. I went to the broken front door and looked outside. The porch was empty. The clearing was peaceful in the early morning light. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there. My legs gave out and I slid down against the doorframe. I hadn't really slept in days, just caught a few minutes here and there between horrors. But I couldn't rest yet. I had to secure the cabin before nightfall. Fix the door somehow. Prepare for whatever would come next. I forced myself up and went back to the kitchen. There was instant coffee in one of the cabinets. I made it strong and black, my hands shaking as I poured hot water over the grounds. While it cooled, I flipped through the book again. There was a section about the things that came at night. They will wear the faces of those you've lost, the dead, the distant, the estranged. They know details only the real person would know. They will beg. They will cry. They will make promises. And when that fails, they will show their true nature. They cannot enter unless invited. The threshold is the boundary they cannot cross without permission. This is why you must stay inside after dark, regardless of what you hear or who calls your name. I sipped the bitter coffee, thinking about Lillian at the door. Dolly. My grandmother. They'd all known things, specific details about my life. How was that possible? I kept reading. They pull the knowledge from your mind. Your memories become their weapons. The more you think about someone, the more ammunition you give them. This is why isolation is both protection and torture for the Guardian. Human connection is dangerous here. Loneliness is safer. Great. So I was supposed to spend how long? Months? Years? Decades? Alone in this cabin with only monsters for company. I flipped to another section. The Guardian's term ends only in death or when another of the bloodline accepts the role willingly. The cabin will not release you otherwise. This is the covenant that maintains the barrier. So that was it. I was trapped here until I died, or until this Melissa Bell person somehow ended up here and agreed to take over. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows. Birds were singing outside. It all seemed so normal, so peaceful. Hard to believe that in a few hours the horrors would start again. I needed to get to work. First, I found tools in the basement and fixed the front door as best I could. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep things out. Then I went through the cabin room by room, checking windows, reinforcing weak spots. The attic door remained locked. None of my keys fitted. According to the book, that was a good thing. Whatever was up there needed to stay contained. Around noon, I took a break to eat something. My stomach growled at the smell of canned soup heating on the stove. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a proper meal. As I ate, I kept reading. The book had a section about the basement. The hidden room contains the collected knowledge of all Guardians. It can only be accessed when truly needed. If you find yourself there, take what you need and leave the rest for those who come after. I thought about the room full of journals and books. How many Guardians had added to that collection over the years? How many people had been trapped here just like me? After eating, I found paper and pens in a drawer. I sat at the kitchen table and began to write my own version of the rules, adding details Marcus had omitted. 1. Stay inside after dark, no matter what you hear or who calls your name. They will sound exactly like people you've known. They will know things only those people could know. They will beg. They will cry. They will make promises. They are not real. 2. Never enter the attic or acknowledge the sounds from above. The footsteps are real. The scratching is real. The thing up there is real, but it grows stronger when you pay attention to it. Ignore it completely. 3. Keep the basement door locked at all times. If it opens by itself, leave immediately unless it's dark outside. If it's dark, you must choose. Face what comes through the door, or enter the basement willingly. If you choose to enter, go all the way to the hidden room. They cannot follow you there. 4. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Marcus Alvarez or any previous Guardian. They will appear in multiple forms simultaneously, living in dead versions side by side. This is a sign of their desperation. They are the most dangerous of the manifestations. I paused, tapping the pen against the paper. Then I added, 5. You cannot leave. The car won't start. The phone won't work. The paths will lead you in circles back to the cabin. This isn't a temporary situation. This is your life now. You are the guardian until death or until another takes your place. I sat back and looked at what I'd written. It seemed so inadequate compared to what I'd experienced. How could I possibly prepare someone else for this? I thought about Melissa Bell in Toronto. Would she end up here someday? Would she find these notes and wonder what kind of madman wrote them? I added one more line. I'm sorry. I didn't choose this for you any more than Marcus chose it for me. But here we are. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. I had maybe 2 hours before sunset. I went through the cabin again, double-checking locks, making sure everything was secure. As the light began to fade, I sat at the kitchen table with Marcus's journals spread around me. I had so much more to learn, so much more to understand. The first thump came from the attic earlier than usual. Just a single footstep, like someone testing if the floor would creak. I didn't look up. Rule number 2, never acknowledge the sounds from above. Instead, I opened another journal and kept reading. I had accepted my role, my purpose, my prison. I was the guardian now. Outside, the sun dipped below the trees and darkness began to fall. I was ready. I'd been writing for hours, my hand cramping as I filled page after page with everything I knew. The sun hadn't even set yet when the first footstep came from the attic. Just a single thud, like someone testing if I was paying attention. I didn't look up, didn't even pause. Rule number 2, never acknowledge the sounds from above. My pen kept moving across the paper, documenting everything I'd learned from Marcus's journals, everything about this place, everything the next guardian would need to know. The attic entity feeds on attention, I wrote. Even thinking about it gives it strength. When the footsteps start, focus on something else entirely. Count backwards from 100. Recite song lyrics. Write like I'm doing now. Anything to keep your mind occupied. The footsteps picked up pace, moving from one end of the attic to the other. Back and forth, back and forth. The ceiling light swayed slightly with each heavy step. I kept writing. The basement door will open by itself. This is a test. If it happens during daylight, leave immediately. If it happens after dark, you have a choice to make. Face what comes through or enter willingly. If you choose to enter, go all the way to the hidden room. They cannot follow you there. 3 soft knocks at the front door made me pause, but only for a second. Andy? A woman's voice called. Andy, are you in there? It's Shannon. Shannon Dennis. We dated briefly after college before she moved to Colorado for a park ranger job. I hadn't thought about her in years. Andy, my car broke down about a mile back. I was hiking in the area and saw smoke from your chimney. Can I use your phone? I almost laughed at that. My phone that hadn't had signal since I arrived. My phone that was now just an expensive flashlight and clock. I kept writing. They will wear the faces of people you've known, not just the dead. Anyone you've lost touch with, anyone who's left your life. They'll know things only those people could know. They'll have the same voice, same laugh, same little habits. They are not real. Andy, please, Shannon's voice cracked. It's getting dark. I'm scared. The footsteps above grew louder, more insistent. The basement door handle jiggled, my little chorus of horrors right on schedule. I dipped my pen in the ink again. I'd found an old-fashioned fountain pen and ink bottle in the desk drawer. Seemed fitting somehow, more permanent than a ballpoint. The things that come at night are not the real threat, I wrote. They're just symptoms of what's contained here. Think of them as antibodies trying to expel a foreign presence. You. The real danger is what happens if you break the rules. If you enter the attic. If you leave after dark. If you invite them in. Andy! Shannon screamed now, pounding on the door. I can see you through the window. I know you're in there. I glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn. She couldn't see anything. I'm hurt, Andy. There's something out here in the woods. Please." The pounding grew more frantic. The doorknob rattled violently. I kept writing. When they can't trick you, they'll try to scare you. They'll scream. They'll threaten. They'll make you think they're in danger. Remember, nothing human is out there after dark. The attic footsteps had stopped. That was never a good sign. The silence from above was worse than the noise. It meant whatever was up there was listening, focusing all its attention downward. I wrote faster. To Melissa Bell, I don't know you. You don't know me. But we're connected by blood and by this place. If you're reading this, it means I've died and the cabin has passed to you. I'm sorry. I didn't choose this for you any more than Marcus chose it for me. The pounding at the door stopped suddenly. Then came a soft, wet sound, like something heavy and damp being dragged across the porch. Andy. Shannon's voice was different now, deeper, with a strange echo behind it. You should have let me in when I was still me. I didn't look up, didn't respond, just kept writing. The rules aren't suggestions. They're the bars of a cage where you are both prisoner and guard. This cabin contains something ancient and hungry, something that would destroy everything if it got out. Your job is to make sure that never happens. A scratching sound came from the window, not fingernails, but something harder. Claws, maybe. I see you, Guardian, said the thing that wasn't Shannon anymore. Your uncle saw me too, at the end. He was so tired, so ready to let go. That made me pause. It was trying a new tactic tonight. He told me about you before he died, about how he'd never met you, about how guilty he felt passing this burden to a stranger. I set down my pen and rubbed my eyes. They burned from hours of writing in dim light. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The scratching at the window continued. He died alone, you know, in pain, calling for help that never came. I picked up my pen again and kept writing. The entities will use everything against you. Guilt, loneliness, fear. They'll try to make you doubt yourself, doubt the rules, doubt your purpose. Stay strong. The basement door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn around. He's right, Andy. A man's voice this time. The elderly Parker Collins version of Marcus. I did die alone, in this very cabin. No one should die alone. Added another voice. The rotting corpse version of Marcus, its voice wet and thick. I kept writing, my hand steady despite everything. They will appear as multiple versions of the same person, living and dead simultaneously. This is their most desperate tactic. It means you're winning. You're not winning, Andy, said Parker Marcus from right behind my chair. You're just prolonging the inevitable. I could smell him. Aftershave and mothballs and something medicinal underneath. The rotting version smelled worse, like meat left too long in the sun. Every guardian breaks eventually, said the rotting Marcus. Some last years, some decades. But they all break. I dipped my pen again and wrote, when they get close enough that you can smell them, recite the rules out loud. It weakens them. I cleared my throat. Rule 1. Stay inside after dark, no matter what you hear or who calls your name. The presence behind me shifted uneasily. Rule 2. Never enter the attic or acknowledge the sounds from above. The footsteps started again, angry now, pounding hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Rule 3. Keep the basement door locked at all times. If it opens by itself, leave immediately unless it's dark. The basement door slammed shut with a bang that made me jump, despite myself. Rule 4. Don't believe anyone claiming to be Marcus Alvarez or any previous guardian. We're still here, Andy, the voices said together, but they sounded farther away now, like they'd moved back toward the kitchen. I kept writing, filling page after page with everything I'd learned. Everything Melissa would need to know when she ended up here. I wrote about the hidden room in the basement with its centuries of journals. I wrote about how the cabin chose its guardians through bloodline. I wrote about how the barrier weakened when the guardian was weak, through exhaustion, illness, or despair. The voices kept talking, but I tuned them out. The footsteps kept pacing, but I ignored them. The scratching at the windows continued, but it couldn't reach me. I had accepted my role, my purpose, my prison. Hours passed. My hand cramped, but I kept going. This was important. This was necessary. This was my job now, to maintain the barrier between the ancient wrongness trapped here and the innocent world beyond these walls. Around midnight, I felt something change in the air, a shift in pressure, like before a storm. The voices fell silent all at once. The footsteps stopped. The scratching ceased. I looked up for the first time in hours. The living room was empty. The basement door was closed. Outside, the night was perfectly still. I stood up, stretching my stiff back. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since noon. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich, eating it mechanically while I reviewed what I'd written. 57 pages of notes, warnings, and instructions. Everything I could think of that might help Melissa Bell survive this place. I gathered the pages and put them in a folder, then placed it in the hidden room in the basement, alongside Marcus's journals and the ancient leather book. She would find them when she needed them, just as I had. Back upstairs, I checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Everything was secure. The silence continued, heavy and watchful. They were regrouping, I knew, changing tactics. Tomorrow night they'd try something new. I went to the bedroom and lay down on top of the covers, too tired to undress. Sleep came almost instantly, deep and dreamless. I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. Birds were singing outside. The cabin was peaceful, almost normal looking in the morning light. I got up and made coffee, then sat at the kitchen table with Marcus's journals spread around me. I had so much more to learn, so much more to understand. The rules were clear now. The purpose was clear. My role was clear. I was the guardian of the cabin, the keeper of the barrier, the jailer of whatever ancient wrongness was trapped here. And I would do my job until I couldn't anymore. Until death, or until Melissa Bell took my place. I opened another journal and began to read, preparing for the night to come. Outside, the sun climbed higher in a perfectly blue sky. Another beautiful day in my prison. I was ready.